So I played Hellblade, and I suffer from psychosis. And this is great! I never played these types of games alone because of my mental health. I just wouldn't be able to get through the first level. But I can say for the first time I got into the game, I felt understood. And sharing that with other people while playing together was amazing. For the first time I could show how it felt to have psychosis, to not know what's real or fiction and the anxiety it creates. It's amazing what this team made and care it was given into the struggles people with psychosis go through. I don't hear voices, but I do suffer from hallucinations, and though I've come to be accustomed to them when I was without medication, I never knew when it could go out of the rails. And the way the voices and monsters blend with the space of the game, while at the same time feeling a little off, representing how my reality is, when everything is in a constant of between reality and imagination, it's so impressive. And might I say, terrifying as it is also. They follow me everywhere. The stairs, watching me, almost waiting to catch me or attack at any time. And how suffocating it can be. The anxiety other people said they experienced in the game was almost like I was the one talking about my psychotic episodes. And that fascinated me and still does. From the sound design to the mechanics and visuals, this is an amazing experience, both for people with mental illness or those without it, connecting them both through understanding and empathy. I'm so used to a poor representation of psychosis in the media that makes this game a breath of fresh air.
What's happening? It's breathing. It's breathing. It's breathing. He knows she's getting closer. He can feel her coming closer. She's getting closer.
The game is meant to be played with headphones, recorded by a 3D sound microphone, those used for SMR, creating the illusion that the voices come from everywhere, behind you, all around, and at the same time from your head, whispering as close as it can get to your ear, resulting in an immersive experience, one that brings the symptoms of psychosis to an incredible accurate assimilation. Some voices contradict others, and they are incorporated in the fighting mechanic, warning you of enemy attacks and commanding on your actions, leaving you sometimes completely disoriented and without knowing what to do. Others telling you what to do when you're stuck in a puzzle. They are very predominant in the development of the game, creating familiarity and making the player grow used to them, resulting in a strange feeling when they aren't there. Something most people with psychosis experience, including me, when they start medication to remove the episodes. For me, I felt emptiness, and that I wasn't myself anymore. I actually missed the hallucinations. They were a part of me. These familiarities can be dangerous, making you dependent on them, giving them power over you. The game mechanics can be tedious. They make each fight and struggle more real. So, in being tedious, it's actually a good thing. The player has to go through puzzles, continuous roadblocks and passages in various fights, and the way they are all sometimes tedious and maybe frustrating, go in direct correlation with the mechanics.
She can't help but think of him. A tender guiding flame in a world so black.
The way Senua is positioned in the screen reminds me a lot of the evil within. While in the game was for the terrifying objective of not being able to have a complete awareness of your surroundings at all times, giving to the feeling of claustrophobia, in Hellblade it gives off the same, but story-wise. When in combat, Senua movements are focused entirely in one enemy, while the rest of the arena stays almost out of sight, giving the player anxiety mid-battle without knowing if there are others behind or in your flank. And that's where the voices come in. I may say the gameplay is frustrating, but I found it very much enjoyable. Like I understood how tedious it could be, long walks in halls and not much variety in the fighting. But it all went together, maybe because I was playing with other people, but it all went together with this great purpose of I want to see how this develops, of how these voices that Senua hears and the true objective of her journey, how is it gonna end up, even though we're going through circles and circles and running in halls and countless fights that are mostly all the same. The movements and attacks of Senua pronounce very swiftly, because of her being an experienced warrior, but they feel very mechanical still, making it hard for the player to respond to many number of enemies. Like in the end of the game, especially, where you find endless waves of enemies, making it harder and harder to press on, especially if you are playing in a PC like me. Now, during the parts without fighting, we are trapped in her sight, in her point of view. The camera, though a third person, is influenced by the mind and body of Senua. We only see what she sees and move to the limits that Senua can move in the different points of the story. And that's where it can be frustrating and tedious, because we can feel her heaviness and fatigue, our mind shattering and filled with hope and hopelessness. I could even say that the way the assets of the game seem to be a certain size from afar, but when you get close Senua turns into a midget, could be a fantastic way to represent how our mind fools herself. And our reality is always shifting, sometimes to a nightmare, sometimes to a beautiful dream, and a landscape full of color. The struggle Senua fights, the player does as well, creating a connection even stronger, hearing the voices mock you and disencourage you to continue, while others tell you to press on, producing an internal dispute in the player. I have to go through with my struggles even if they say I'm a failure in my everyday life, making this experience in the game almost familiar. The fighting style is very simple, without any upgrades or skill tree. It's built around the difficulties that we go through in our everyday life, especially before the condition it's diagnosed and controlled. Senua can only be aware of one enemy at a time, transfiguring to the brain limitations that may occur in the stress times. It solely relies on your familiarity with the controls and the enemies, but the most important is the fact that you depend on the voices warning you of enemies attacking from out of sight, giving exactly the same process that people like me go through. The familiarity and the start of connecting the voices with reality.
What's happening?
Quiet.
It's not.
He wants me to find him. I'm lost without him.
It's not here.
That doesn't sound like Delia.
What's it sound?
What's in there?
What is it?
A secret room.
Rose. How do you get in there? How does she get in there?
That voice.
The way the character is collocated forms an illusion of the space and dimensions, making objects look small, but when you get closer, the bigger it will get, making you so small in comparison of how it was before. I love the feeling this can create of untrust and perception, even if it was accidental. The creature's half shadows are my favorite. They remind me of my shadows and how in the beginning of the symptoms and hallucinations it can be exactly like that. In my case, the hallucinations were characters and wore impossible facial and physical features, and I knew they weren't real because of that, and the shadiness in their silhouette, just like shadows. They initially are just shadows, giving form and realism over time. These small details create a full experience fulfilling the story of Senua. In the documentary that comes included in the game, it's demonstrated that different people can have entirely different perceptions of what's surrounding them, from shapes and sizes and also color. And in the puzzle sequences, the game utilizes that experience for warning the player of what's happening. If you're in danger, there can be glows of red and flashing images, and in puzzles, the color transcends the object they're from, like the creator said, making it look like a kaleidoscope. One notable thing in the puzzles is the first one. I could talk about each one and how accurate they represent different symptoms and perceptions, but this one, which accompanies you throughout the game, speaks to me to a certain level. When the runes are visualized by Senua and get imprinted in the screen, normally you would think it's to remember the player. Well, correct, but even though they could just go back and look at it again, it also shows how something can be so planted in our minds to go almost to an extent of and level that we can see it anywhere. Like when you're close to the solutions and when the player finds it, shows that exact difference in perspective. Though simply it represents how she can see things that no one could ever see, like the faces on the rocks. It's such a lovely design, and when it comes to level design, it's entirely well put together, making the journey of Senua torture and the constant reminder of trauma and their overcoming it a great point. And I would like to think that it's all for the purpose of embodying the frustration it can be for people without a care and treatment they should have. The big levels of walking and sometimes not being sure where to go and feeling lost embody just that. Now, I'm about to talk about the story in this last bit, and if you don't want to get spoilers, jump to the time on the screen. You've been warned.
And become a warrior in Dillion's clan.
Go back. It's not safe.
The sword is tainted by the gods of darkness. Leave it.
No. He left it here. He wants me to take it.
The story shows a broken Celtic warrior, Senua, accompanied with voices commenting and contradicting each other. Some laughing, something I before experienced, others telling you to turn away. The world is as fantastic as it can be haunting, showing how our world can be. For me, it's like that in Crisis. For some, it can be an everyday thing. I felt a sense of familiarity and connection because of it, something I sadly never felt before. I always felt like an outcast, maybe a villain, possibly dangerous or scary. Our life with Dillian, our loved one, even with its difficulties, it was largely peaceful and full of light. But one day she leaves the village to fight her own demons, translated into the darkness in a tribe that everyone talks about in the game. And her mother was just like her, being sacrificed for it. But when she returns is only to find her home destroyed and their beloved dead by the endless raids of the Northmen, in other words Vikings, starting her quest to bring Dillian back from the dead. The journey is guided by Druth, before known as Finden, a scholar that Senua met before the game, but dead during it, appearing as a recollection of her mind, hallucination, ending his appearances when she discovers he has been dead. Her demons are not just her condition and her psychosis misunderstood, but also her insecurities and doubts. And finally, the relation with her father, a priest who mandated the death of her mother, trying his hardest, believing only he could cure the darkness. This misunderstanding is also very common nowadays, not to obviously this extent, but in a way especially without a diagnosis and for the lack of information and disclosure. It can be very stigmatizing. The entire journey is led by the delusions that she can bring back her beloved if she brings his head to Hell, the Norse mythology realm of the dead, where the goddess Hel rules and keeps Dillion's soul. And by doing so, she goes through all her struggles, challenges, and suffering, overcoming her insecurities, doubts, and fights, but only to ultimately knowing that there was nothing it could be done. Dillion was gone, and it was all a process to overcome the trauma she's been through. The Ninja Theory team did an amazing job with this full-on representation of psychosis, knowing fully well the fact that it hasn't been having the respect and good treatment and reputation in the past and all the media, and they knew it would be difficult, but it had to be done. Not just for telling a story, but to bring closure and justice to people suffering from these issues that have been deemed maybe crazy and stigmatized for the past years. And I'm glad and thankful that that exactly objective and mission is a great focus nowadays. I can see it in all internet, from all industries somehow. Maybe to get more included, I guess, but nonetheless a good effort. Especially in games, the gaming community has been one of the most predominant makers of accurate and helpful stories and representations of different issues. There's nowadays countless of examples of that exact thing. And I'm thankful for that, and for Ninja Theory, for listening to these people and giving to the world a comforting piece of media.